Tuesday. So today we are going to be experimenting with a different paper. So this is not anything new. This is actually one of the oldest brands of paper you can buy today. This is ARCHES Watercolor. As you can see there, it's the cold pressed 140 pounds. So apparently the weight or whatever the pounds to it has something to do with this paper not warping or bubbling or whatever as much as the other paper. However, I've done some experiments and I found that it's not that different. This is a test that I did prior to this stream. This is of a different painting. As you can see, it did warp. So I've done some different changes where with this paper I taped it but pulled it as I put it onto the surface. The one that you just saw was toned with water beforehand, so it was stretched with water, and that was about the third try that I had with that method, and it just was disastrous. So I found that it's kind of better to just paint on this without pre-wetting it and then stretching it and then leaving it overnight. So this is just a pinkish color that I have here, and it's going to be kind of the base for the face, though you can't really see it too much yet because it's not very dark. And we have a Rembrandt image on the top left. That's what we're going to be using. Good old Rembrandt. So hey Grace, Randy, Giselle, Sir Fly, welcome everyone. So yeah, through my experiments with the watercolor, I found that with the cold press, I don't think the hot press is going to make that big of a difference, but it might. I'm going to experiment with that next. But I found that it still buckles a little bit, and at this point, I've read some things online where that's kind of just something you accept with watercolor, and it kind of creates its own little aesthetic or whatever. So we'll see how that goes. Now let me change the light sensitivity so you can see the color that I'm painting here. Okay, there you go. Yeah, it didn't work for me, wetting it with water and then letting it, like stretching it with staples and letting it sit overnight. It just like, it didn't just warp it, it curved it, which maybe had I left it longer than a day would make a difference. I don't know, but well, we'll find out with this. This paper doesn't buckle quite as much as the other one did. As you can see, it looks pretty bad when I turn it, but flat, it's not really that bad. So we'll see how this goes. As far as the technique is concerned, it's not really that different from what you saw me do before the past couple weeks when we were doing these videos with watercolor. Now obviously you don't see a palette camera, and that's just because it's a little bit too much for me to figure out currently, paper and technology. So there won't be a palette camera, but as you can clearly tell, this is watercolor. So color wise, it's not that complicated. It was literally just a pink that we used for the first little wash for the face. And then now this is a brown that's basically yellow, ochre, green, and red. That's all this is. And I'm using the same pan watercolor little set here, as you can see. You can get this really cheap online. See, it's kind of greenish. Links are in the description box, but you can just stop by any kind of local art store and find something similar to this. Nose is probably going to fit somewhere over there. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. After you frame it, you won't really notice those little edges anyway. So that's something I was thinking about also. Like when you frame it, you won't notice it. So maybe I'm worrying about it for nothing, because when it's framed, then doesn't matter. You won't see it anyway because the glass is gonna press upon it anyway. Now, one thing I like about this paper is a little different from the other paper that I tried, which was also 100% cotton. The other paper that I was using, this paper is a little bit more gritty, I guess, than the other paper that I was using. So that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing for you, depending on what you're interested in. Now with watercolor, because it's such a strange material to me, I'm not going to speak to you as if, you know, I've been using watercolor for like 15 years or something like that, like I have been with oil paint. So it's pretty much all still experimental at this point. When it comes to the handling of the paint, I will tell you, I think it's a little easier than acrylic, and I'll explain more of that as I go along. But the only problem I find with this material is the buckling, and it's not a major concern. Like we mentioned, like when you cover it with glass, you're not going to notice it, so it may not be anything to worry about at all. So it all depends on you. Hey Fatima, yeah, so prior to me moving to a new place like 2 months ago or however long it's been, the streams were always 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So basically like this time right now, Tuesday through Friday. So Tuesday through Friday, that means I'll be back tomorrow, the day after that, and then the day after that. So Tuesday through Friday. Now we're covering the dark, the background. So pretty much kind of like how you would handle oil paint, to be honest. And you can go in with some lighter values later on as you go, because on this palette you see here, there's lighter values here. So once something dark dries, I can just go over it with this, and it's fine. Watercolor does have a white, they call it a Chinese white, but you don't want to rely on it too much in the beginning, just because you want to use the tone of the paper, the natural white tone of the paper, because it's just easier to kind of blend with than adding the paint. No problem, Fatima. You're always welcome. Yeah, and it was kind of a struggle to get all of this stuff started. Last Friday was the first of the regular scheduled streams. So I've been gone for a little while, but we are returning to normal. We are going to primarily focus on 4 different materials: pastel, watercolor, acrylic, oil paint. But of course with pastel we'll have soft and oil pastel, so you'll have your choices there. Covering the darks is kind of important here, and don't be afraid to use more water than you think. And yes, it will buckle a little bit, but when you frame it, you won't notice it that much anyway. So going over this pretty much like an oil painting is kind of a standard procedure for this. So we're going to use something kind of cooler, like a gray. So pretty much just use the greenish color for that. Like I said, we'll be able to add light onto that later. Doesn't matter. Now we're going to go back into the warmer colors. So like kind of a ochre pinkish mixture. Cover that ear. Yes, I know it may look too dark, but we'll be able to darken all that later. Like I said, you can add some light to it, so don't be too afraid of going too dark. And you can, with the paper, push it around, push the darks around. If you place the mouth and somewhere it's not supposed to be, you can move it around. As you see here, it's starting off with all of that water. It will buckle. You see that? So I'd rather just get that out of the way, like early on. Just let it do its thing, let it buckle and get all kinds of weird. And then as you add more layers, just like with the paper we used before, it kind of tends to even out somewhat. Either that or we just get used to it. So just kind of get it out the way early on, is my suggestion. Another value for the shadow, treating it pretty much like oil paint because it stays active for a long time. So you can actually go into this and mess around with it. It's not as unforgiving as you may think. And with the cold pressed paper, it's a little I don't know, I forgot the adjective I said earlier, but it's a little it's more sturdy than the other one, even though it doesn't look like it right now because it's buckling like crazy. It's way more sturdy than the other paper that I use, but the differences aren't that huge. Not that huge of a difference between them. This paper ends up being about for this pad, it ends up being about like $2 a sheet. So this is 12, so you pay about 24. You can get a deal on Amazon and you'll pay even less than that, so less than $2 per sheet. And it's not really that much to complain about. As usual, killing off the darks. It's the usual mode of business here. Usual MO. Just kind of guesstimate where the eyes are going to be placed. And for anyone that's been kind of scared of using watercolor just because you gotta like save the light of the paper and all that stuff, it's not that bad. Like, it's not that bad. You can add light to it, you'll see that as we progress. Now, is this more difficult than oil paint? I would say yes, but honestly, I would say it's easier than acrylic. So if you're used to using acrylic, there's a couple things that you're going to need to kind of adjust to. But other than that, you'll find in the later stages, this is actually easier. So now we're gonna go back to the pinkish color, pinkish kind of orangey. Like I said, just using this little thing. The brush is actually quite huge relative to this, but it's all good. So again, it's kind of a pinkish mixture with the yellow. And this was a already like a pre-mixed portrait set, which in the future, I mentioned this before, but in the future I'm gonna just pre-mix my own. Kind of like those strings of values on the palette for oil painting. I'll pretty much do the same thing with watercolor. And you can do that by buying the tubes. So you could say buy the Zorn palette of paint tubes and watercolor, and then you can just pre-mix your skin tones, your green, your brown, your yellows, whatever you want to use, and then just let it dry. You can get tubes of paint like this and then mix them together into these trays and just let it dry and then reuse them. Much easier than acrylic. You don't have to worry about the stay wet palette. And for acrylic, I'm gonna be changing it around, where with acrylic we're gonna be exploring things like landscapes and still lifes and stuff like that that you wouldn't normally see on my YouTube channel, just because acrylic lends itself to things like that. Watercolor actually lends itself to stuff like this, which is more similar to oil paint, working with these little values. But feel free to ask any questions you have. Again, we're going to return to the older schedule that we had before I moved, which is Tuesday through Friday, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And you can, a nice thing is you just leave that alone and then reactivate it later. So you can work with big broad planes like the same day. See how I threw a little bit of greenish there? You can work with big broad planes the same day and reactivate each section. It's not something that you can do with acrylic, which makes acrylic better for certain things like still life or architectural type paintings. But when you're blending stuff together, it's actually easier, in my opinion, to use the watercolor. Going back to that pinkish yellow with a little bit of ochre, maybe a touch of green. Might be too much green, but we'll see. Yeah, that might have been too much green, but that's okay. Go in with the kind of orangey color, pinkish orangey color, and we're able to fix it. And everything gets kind of dark down here. So really the only bright lights we have to preserve are up here and here. And you don't have to be that careful about it either. The paper was not wet in the beginning of the session. As you can see, it started, as soon as we added like the entire background, it started to buckle a little bit. So as we add more layers, it's gonna eventually kind of like, all these kind of folds just kind of go out towards the end. So I found this to be a little bit more reliable than wetting it and then letting it dry overnight. It's just from my experiments. There could be different factors like humidity, temperature, how long you let the paper sit. But no, the paper wasn't wet before. Now it is. I mean, all of this is definitely wet. But it wasn't like the wetting the back side of it. I didn't do that. I experimented with a couple things. One was wetting the whole thing, stretching it with those little staples and letting it sit overnight. Another one is I wet the back side and then I painted on the front side, and each time it buckled somewhat, and there's almost no avoiding it. But I find this to be a little bit more reliable. I also only bought the paper over the weekend, so it's not like I had that much time. I had like 2 days to mess around with it. So we can try different things. as time progresses. Yeah, I guess we could say that. Yeah, the paper will relax at some point. It's a very active thing. But I will say watercolor is more forgiving than you would think. It's not so bad. Like I said, you can reactivate certain areas. The mixing itself is not that complicated. You just mix the same type of colors you do with oil paint, and you're good to go. Meaning for the skin tones, it's just kind of like a Zorn palette type of deal. Yellow, ochre, black, red, white. Well, there you go. You can create these types of skin tones. Work from general to specific shapes. You don't have to have a very careful line drawing and then fill in the dots and stuff like that. That's kind of more for like an architectural type painting. By architectural, I mean like if you're painting a building with like windows in it in a seascape or whatever, with like seashells on the beach and stuff like that, and you don't want information to be lost, then yeah, acrylic would be better for that. But it's kind of almost like oil paint, where you can just blend it around, push it, mush it around, and it's fine. It doesn't fight with you as much as something that would dry right away, like acrylic. And you don't need to worry about a stay wet palette. And you don't need to worry about your paints drying on you, because you can, like I said, you can get these tubes and premix whatever color you want, let it sit in a tray like this, and reuse it. Once it dries, it turns into a pan palette, and it's small, as you can see here, relative to the size of my hand. It's small. You can have a bigger one if you want, but it's small, so lots of benefits to it. Only problem, like I said, being the paper buckling. I'm sure if you paint on like an aluminum panel that was pre-gessoed beforehand, you might have an easier time, though I've never done that one before. Have I tried masking products or techniques to preserve my lights? Not so much, no, I haven't done that at all. Using the little glue or whatever to preserve my lights. In the future we can mess around with things like that, but so far I've been just only been like a couple days since I bought the paper, so kind of wasn't in my budget to get the I got a hair stuck on the edge here. Trying to take it out. That's an annoying thing when you have long hair. Your hair gets stuck on. There we go. It might have even been one of the hairs from the bristles. But anyway, like I said, you can push that around. Look, I can add more paint to it, and it's like nothing happened. But no, I haven't tried any of those where it's like the little glue or whatever, and you save the section on the painting, like the area of light or something like that. But usually there's enough like leeway between this and this that if I make a mistake, right, like say that this, I needed some light. Well, I've got something on my palette that's light enough. I can peel or push a light back into it. And you see that in some Sargents as well, where he used the Chinese white to add some light back into the section of the painting, but I wouldn't want to rely on it. But I mean, if Sargent did it, then why would I question him? But it's just not something I want to rely on. But there's enough kind of like freedom or like leeway or whatever in the light that I don't feel the need to have to meticulously save a section of light. Now suppose this was more of an architectural type painting. Say this is a pool table, and then there's a highlight right on the rail or the edge of a pool table. Then yeah, it'd be too specific for me to save pieces of light like that. So then perhaps, yeah. But if that's the case, then I would use acrylic. So what we're gonna do with all of these different materials, we've got 4 of them now. So what we're gonna do with all of these materials is we're gonna figure out what works best, what can we do best with each of these materials. And with watercolor, if I don't deem it to be useful for this type of painting, then I won't use it for this type of painting. So perhaps this will be more useful for more organic things like forest landscapes or whatever like that, less architectural. Then we'll move on to that, but I deem it to be pretty nice, in my current opinion, for this kind of portraiture. But we'll figure it out. Well, thanks, Giselle. Well, when it comes to control of lights and darks, you make a good point there that there is more drawing concerns in terms of preserving, like say that, like I stopped right there because it was right on the edge. But you want to think about instead of like 100 to 95% accuracy, which is what we think we need to do when we're drawing something, especially in a portrait, you really only need maybe about 85% accuracy or something like that. So for example, this is now too low on the forehead, but there needs to be a soft edge in between the forehead and the hat. So I could pretty much just go with something yellow ochre like right here and just see how I can dig right into the paper. I told you it's a pretty strong paper. And now, just like oil paint, I can push that up, which creates a softer edge and allows me to redraw this as opposed to having to do a very careful line drawing and biting my nails and being terrified of whether I made the forehead too long or too short. So things like that. It's very similar to oil paint, which is why I'm using it for this. And pastel is the same exact thing. It allows you that kind of freedom. Again, the only material that doesn't give you that kind of freedom is acrylic, but it gives you other advantages that you don't get from something like this. Yeah, I don't need to use unless for really bright. That would make sense. So for example, that's a perfect example, like what you just mentioned, for really bright lights. So like I could imagine if I was doing a watercolor painting of a car, like suppose I was doing this is gonna be fun. Suppose I'm doing a watercolor painting of a drone in the sky of New Jersey. Then for the blinking lights of the drone in the sky of New Jersey, I would probably need to put little dots of something to preserve the white of the paper, because you'll never get it back. And you're right, exactly. You'll never get that light of the paper back unless you preserve it, or you use Chinese white or something, which is a valid thing you can do. Like I said, Sargent used that as well. See this white tube? You can use that as well. Okay, Fatima, yeah, you could use gouache or you can scratch into it. That is true. I didn't think about that. So pretty much like an oil painting, everyone. It's not that different in the beginning, except for you're preserving these lights here. Like I said, you can reactivate these darks as well, so I'm perfectly fine with adding a dark section like that over here. And we've come a long way, I will say, with watercolor. I was terrified of it in the beginning, and I even tried to use a pencil to draw out the light in the beginning and kind of use like our classical type approach, building it up, and all that was really, as you could see how simple this is, it's not that necessary. There's a 5-minute video of one in Maine. See, yeah, there you go. So for example, so if you're painting a drone, a picture of a drone in the sky of Maine that was in the air for 5 minutes, then that light would be so bright that you would not be able to get that light with this method. You'd have to preserve it with something. You'd tape it, even put a little piece of tape or whatever to save that dot. Or like the white of his collar here. Like, I'm just going to use the Chinese white when I get to that. I'm not even going to think about trying to preserve the such a perfect highlight right here. Not even going to think about it. I don't have time for that. Right, brighter than white. I guess, yeah, you could probably get a reflective something and it'll be brighter than white. Yeah. Now putting the shadow underneath his jaw. I don't know about all of you, but I've always been super curious about the whole like UFO phenomenon. So my family is from Peru. I was not born and raised in Peru, and I barely know any Spanish. Like a big majority of now people, millennials my age, that their families came from different countries. I've always been curious about that stuff, the whole UFO phenomenon and things. And whether I believe in it or whatever, and to me doesn't matter. I think belief doesn't matter. Like whatever is gonna be true is gonna be true. But it would be kind of neat. And we've painted some UFOs and some paintings before. It's always an interesting thing to think about. I've got some science buddies that are like explaining like how deeply impossible it is to gather enough energy to create a wormhole to travel through space or whatever, because there's not enough energy available in space as it is. Yeah, I get it, but who knows? Who really knows? I barely know how to do watercolor, so how in the world am I gonna be able to think about those thoughts? But still, they're interesting to think about. But fun little light conversation. This brush, by the way, is an acrylic brush. or at least it was intended to be originally. This is a Princeton Catalyst poly to bristle. I also used it for oil paint for many, many years. This exact same brush. These are amazing brushes. Like, I wouldn't be able to use this kind of technique with a bristle, I don't think. But as you can see, the paper is starting to kind of do its thing and settle into, instead of being warped in the middle, it's like starting to warp out here. And we do end up using less water as we progress, I think. Oh, you have videos and pictures over the past 20 years? I wish I had seen one, but no. My mom told me she saw one in somewhere in Peru when she was a child. Nah, I've never been lucky enough to see one. I've always wanted to. Makes you wonder if Rembrandt or any of the other old masters have seen something in the sky. Hey Fatima, your ala prima with watercolor is hard. Oh, thanks. Well, with watercolor, yes, you're correct. I guess I didn't think about it that way, but yeah, it is kind of like ala prima a little bit. Now, as you can see, this light here, of course, this is the paper doing its thing, so you'll notice whether it will correct itself or not. But as far as pushing the paint around is concerned, or it drying funky, like sometimes it dries different in acrylic, it's not that big of an issue with these watercolors. And like this, if I go too dark, well, then I can add, as you can see there, something lighter to it, so it's not that bad. It's really not that bad if you're comparing it to something like oil paint. It's really not that bad. And now, believe it or not, we can start to get into some subtleties, which were pretty much 20 minutes ahead of time, getting into subtleties stage. But I guess we can start to do that as the brush will now start to, we'll start to use a smaller brush, though I'll use this bigger one as long as I can. It's been a process learning how to use watercolor, and I think in the beginning, had I just treated it kind of the same as oil paint, with obviously a better paper, the one that we're using now, it would have been a different story. Maybe I would have learned it faster, but it wouldn't have been as interesting to not, have these different learning curves. And you've seen this Rembrandt before, maybe like 3 times at this point on my YouTube. So as this progresses, I am using less and less water. If you don't use a pan palette, I would highly recommend you use one. It's just a lot easier in my opinion, because you don't have to worry about accidentally putting too much paint. And like right here, the green right by my thumb, I don't know if you can see it. You can see it kind of reflecting on the bottom right. That is from the tube. That's because I don't have a green pan yet. But most of what I'm using here is thanks to the pans. The pans just make it easier to not accidentally put too much paint. And if you have any fears or concerns over watercolor, mainly because people like me, oil painters that have been oil painting forever, just say that it's a very difficult material. It's not that bad. Like, as you can see here, it's not that bad. Trust me, it's more difficult for me to get to Safeway during rush hour living across the street from it than it is to put these planes of value and color. You can mush them around. That's not the end of the world if you misplace one of them. So long as you don't lose your light and shadow, you're good. Nice. See, we can start to add some planes. Generally with watercolor, you want to work up to your highlights. So working dark outside into light inside, I think, is the better way to do it. Unless you have a light outside and dark inside, but just building your way up to light, whether your light is in the middle or in the outside. And like I said, these planes, these little brush strokes can stay that way, and you can reactivate it by adding more light. I can move this up or down however I want, and I think I can do that change even more so with this ARCHES paper than I can with the other paper. See, I can move so many things around with this paper. It's not just the paper. Like with the other paper, it could have been the same as well, just with more buckling. But I think it'd be a lot easier once I'll pre-mix values using maybe just a Zorn palette on my pans. I just didn't buy any extra pans, which is foolish. I could get those pans for probably under $1 each, the empty ones. Yeah, I get that. More about the buildup of layers. And did I mention how clean watercolor is to use? How low maintenance? I must have mentioned this before, a couple weeks ago, but even now, it's so low maintenance. Any fellow apartment dwellers that don't like cleaning brushes or using their sink to clean anything art related, this is the material for you. The paper itself, like I said, this is like less than $2 basically for a sheet of paper. It's a no-brainer. Just like pastel, it's just so low maintenance. It's like the material walks up to you and says they'll make you an offer you can't refuse. And you end up really not being able to refuse it. Even more low maintenance than acrylic. Go figure. Now here's a highlight that we want to preserve. So see how I'll circle around it so we can save that highlight. And even if I mess it up, like I said, we can always add a lighter value to it. It's not a big deal. So there's really nothing to worry about with these paints. I could even just leave that plane there, go and eat lunch, come back, and be able to reactivate it in about an hour or so, just like I can do now. Reactivate it. Like I said, with acrylic, it would not do that. And obviously oil paint would do that for you as well. The interesting thing is it wouldn't be able to do that in the next day or two. Would watercolor? I actually don't know. I'm gonna return to some of my older ones just to mess around with them and see if that's even possible. It might be, but it may not be. Right, yeah, delicacy and transparency of watercolor, that is definitely a thing. You can see the different layers through it as even the paper starts to buckle around and do its thing. See here now it's like not as shiny, and I think that's only because the paint is drying. It's a very unique thing. It's, I guess all the materials are unique in some ways. But with this one, you can really kind of experience the material drying, the paper moving around, and the layers kind of stacking on top of one another in a way that you wouldn't with the other materials. I can see that. I haven't even used a small brush yet. Go figure. And of course I can move the brush around just like I can with oil paint. It's pretty nice. Oh goodness, Giselle. We will fix that, don't worry. He will certainly have his creases up here soon. But you know, there are plenty of paintings of the younger Rembrandt. we can compare to. That was a good one. That's funny. We'll get to a little more accuracy as we go. We've got 8 minutes till the break, which makes sense after we get back from the first break. The subtleties, we start to work with the subtleties. This was more just covering the background, big picture kind of stuff. See that? We can add light right into the background. Just like that. Can't believe it, but we can add light into the dark. And again, pretty much like oil paint. Not that different. Now, as we're starting to subdivide into smaller planes, it's important to look at different shapes in relation to one another. So, for example, as you add values for under the chin, perhaps pay attention to what these values look like in relation to what's above, so that you don't make something too light or too dark. Something to think about. Hey, Mark L. No, I didn't add any of the Chinese white yet. It's whatever this yellow is. It might even have Chinese white in it, but this yellow was already in this set of pastels. So very likely it does have Chinese white in it, I think. But whatever this yellow is what I added there. Even though it looks gray, it's a yellow that I added to it. But you could use the Chinese white. But just don't use too much of it, I think, early on. Like, don't use it for this to add all of these lights, but maybe for something like that's gonna be a couple brush strokes and be done. Yep, no problem. Okay, so now we're getting to that point where you start to subdivide your planes from bigger ones to smaller ones. And what's interesting is all of painting is kind of the same thing with whatever you're doing. If you have a composition, a painting that's like 10 feet by 20 feet or whatever, and you have anything that has form, you always get to a point where you start to subdivide planes into smaller ones. And for most people, I notice that this tends to be where everything falls apart. So how to prevent that from happening, in my opinion, is to study as you already know, study what I'm going to say. You already know the answer to it. Study these things as much as you can, and you'll start to notice that all of these little intricate forms and things like that can be done with very small adjustments to light and shadow and values, of course. But it is those subtle changes, the little subtle changes, that are the most difficult to figure out, as opposed to doing a perfect pixel by pixel copy of something. That's the job of either a camera or an AI to do that for us, or a drone, whichever you want to do the painting for you. So before we take another break, let's go ahead and add some more value to the background. Hey Leslie, you said you iron gently on the back between two pieces of cloth. Oh, that's a new one. Okay. I read something about ironing when it's done, but I didn't think about it before. Between two pieces of cloth. You mean, so do you mean when it's finished? Do you mean like this one where it buckled like this? Like iron it? I could try that. Of course, I'm down to try something new. I'm down for that. Iron it after the painting or before. Maybe I'm not stretching it as much, as I'm not pulling on it as much as I would with like a linen canvas or something like that, because I don't want to pull it apart. But it could be I'm just not pulling at it enough. That would be interesting if that was the cause. I just didn't pull enough. Okay, alright, so we've added some more dark to the background. That light should look a little less bright when we return, hopefully, as it will start to dry. As far as the buckling is concerned, perhaps once this painting is done, we can iron it again and then bring it back next week to see if it looks any different. That would be pretty cool to figure out. But anyway, I'm going to take a break now for a couple minutes, probably about 5 minutes or so. And then when we return, we will enter into the subtleties of this painting. So don't go anywhere unless you absolutely have to, and I'll be right back in about 5 minutes or so. Alrighty, so I have returned. It's always so funny though, when I'm on break, the video tends to get more views than the stream. It's kind of funny. But in the future, you know what, we could do some streams like this where it's kind of half and half or something, pre-recorded stuff. But anyway, so I've let about, I think, 7 minutes go by or something to let this dry enough. Of course, I could just get a blow dryer or whatever, but it's mostly dry, that area up there. So now I'm going to switch to smaller brush. This is going to be the part of the painting where I won't speak quite as much. We won't do subtlety trivia just yet. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah, during the break, no, that video was silent. But let me know if you can hear me now. That video was silent. It was supposed to be silent. But let me know if you can hear me now. It's kind of funny. There's painting footage and I'm not talking. And we had 10 more people watching the, the stream. It was hilarious. Well, you learn from every experience. You never know. I could just let a stream be half and half, that video and then this video. Or I mean, not this one, but where I'm painting and talking. The one video I shared was a segment from Patreon. Oh good, you can hear me now. That's good, that's good. So I'm going in with black and a burnt umber type color. Going in with the dark of the eyes. Then we'll add all these little subtleties. Not that there's too many subtleties in this Rembrandt painting. Now, there's certain mistakes that can't be made and recover from that easily with watercolor, such as if I accidentally put some kind of dark mark right here on the edge of his head. At this point now, I would have to let that dry thoroughly and then go right over it with the Chinese white and then let that dry. And even then, you'll always see that mark. Certain things like that you gotta watch out for. So the brush marks will be a little bit more slow, methodical. And switching to a smaller brush for more control. I would say this stage is actually way easier with this paper than with the other one. For some reason, as it has a little bit more grit to it. It's just a little bit more control. Like I said before, you can add light to it. It's not the Chinese white, but it's that yellow, lightish yellow color that came in the portrait watercolor set. The bright pink on the palette is useful for adding a lighter value, but not getting too blue. Like that. Perfect for subtleties. Acrylic or watercolor brush works about the same for this. You just don't want to use a bristle. So it stays open long enough for you to blend into it like this. Create pretty much like oil paint quality soft edges. Almost kind of just like glazing. You can pick certain creases on the forehead and just put marks like this. Just paint right into them. You can even let them settle for like a minute or two, then blend right into them. Whereas with something like acrylic, you'd have to be moving with the quickness, because it only stays open for a short period of time. Here it stays open for quite a while. And in this case, the paper, the grit of this paper does give it more of an advantage over the other paper that I had, which was 100% pure cotton, but it wasn't ARCHES. And ARCHES is of course as old as time. I think ARCHES was around before Rembrandt, so it must have some patents or whatever makes this paper special. It is different. Now, this is the building up to the light. Don't have to be that specific, but a tad bit more specificity is required. Leaving just kind of a zigzag of light there. Again, just leaving a zigzaggy type light for the forehead. Doesn't have to be that bright. Not as bright as a drone over New Jersey, just a little bit bright. Simple. And that pretty much does it. That finishes the forehead mostly. That's simple. So when you're in this section of the painting, you want to go one segment at a time if you can. Sometimes I don't do that, but going one segment at a time makes it easier to manage different topographies of the planes of the face. In this sense, we're actually a little bit faster than we were a couple months ago. Tad bit more organized. The mixtures are identical to oil paint. To get a brown, you use a red and green. To get a pink, you use a red and mostly just red. The big difference here is mainly just the buckling of the paper. But as you can see, this little annoyance is almost gone. So it's all right, it's working out. And if you frame it in glass, well, you won't notice it anyway. And perhaps we'll even be able to iron it. I can't imagine one of your comments would get flagged. It wouldn't have been me. Wouldn't have been any of us. I don't think there are any moderators here. None of my students that I had as moderators 5 years ago are here. So I don't know. It could just be YouTube being weird. But it wasn't me. Strange. But you know, it wouldn't be me. Plus, we don't have a big audience, so it doesn't make sense why YouTube would monitor us at all. Never did have an audience big enough for YouTube to moderate, so I don't know. We don't know. Perhaps it was the drones. They know we're on to them. The only thing YouTube, I think, will automatically take off are any curse words or stuff like that. YouTube will automatically, like, before you even finish typing it, YouTube will get you. But other than that, it shouldn't really go and block anything else. Orbs over the house in the early 50s. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that too. My mom said she saw some UFO type things in Peru when she was a kid. But you know, I doubt YouTube would care about that. Whether the truth is out there or not has nothing to do with us. like I said, we're barely getting, getting through a watercolor painting, so I doubt they're gonna worry about anything like that. Front page news, exactly. Yeah, if it was front page news, there's no way it'd get that much issues from YouTube. But who knows? Who knows? There was one day where the streaming software I'm using for this, I couldn't right click with it for like one day. It turned out to be a glitch that affected everyone that uses this software. So things happen. Things happen. Oh, thanks, Julia. I'm glad you like the subtleties around the nose. It's a really useful material, the watercolor. I feared it so much in the past. I had a lot of trouble with the the process before, like building up, like you mentioned, up to the lights. And eventually it just like right what we did just there. It's just something we eventually learned to not be afraid of, because you can push it around within the exact same painting session. I could still push these lines around, so it doesn't have to be set in stone when it lies there like it does with something like acrylic. And of course the buckling of the paper, still something we have to figure out. But at least it's not as bad with this paper as the other one. But still, I could be asking too much out of a $2 or less sheet of paper to not buckle. Could be asking too much. But as we mentioned, we could put it over glass, put glass over it, and it would be fine. You wouldn't notice. The Guardians of the Galaxy, you mean? That's true. Oh, thanks, Grace. We did have the Guardians of the Galaxy. Unless it was a different kind of Guardians, then I don't know. That I don't know. But I'm always curious. See how in the same exact painting session we can layer over top. And if I wanted to, I think with a little bit more water, I can reactivate the paint underneath. I think. Yep, I can. Crazy how that works. Very forgiving material. Incredibly forgiving. Oh, so you mean like a real one? I didn't know. Giselle, I didn't know. Maybe there are some stuff out there. There is some stuff out there. I didn't know. Now that would be interesting. So if YouTube somehow was like, they can't know there was a special Space Force 6 years ago, then we'll know. If they cancel something, the truth, they're trying to block the truth from us. So the colors, again, are no more complicated than the Zorn palette. Pretty much just red, yellow, black, brown. And if you misplace the mouse or something like that, it's really easy to move. So don't be too afraid. Well, that's an interesting correlation. Same time as the good old pandemic. It's crazy to think that that was so many years ago now. So much happened here. So many social media stars were created during that time. I was not one of them. I was here way before that. Never did become a star, but it's all good. Sometimes it's best to be low key. Just like the subtleties of these dark greenish shapes are by the mouth, low key. Now the fact that this can be done with watercolor is something worth noting today and in future streams. And it's not something that I've seen much of on the internet. Believe me, I've tried to find some videos on watercolor like this, and all of them, well, I'm not going to go into specifics because that wouldn't be fair, but there's a lot of stuff that is about you have to be so dead accurate with your drawing that if you make one big mistake, it's the end of everything, and it's not true. I've shown you it's not true. But don't worry, we'll be doing more videos like this in the future. And I'm sure other people will too, so watercolor is a very This watercolor portrait is a very kind of rich subject. It is weird to make watercolor look like not watercolor. There's so much of the watercolor aesthetic that you can use in a painting, but you find out it's not really that necessary. That's possible, Giselle. It's possible, but human nature, I think, is one of those things set in stone. I don't know, really. I used to tell people, whenever they would ask me, like, really, like, serious life questions, I would say, I don't know anything except for painting. And then now I tell people I don't really know anything except for painting and playing pool. The only things I know a little bit of something about. When it comes down to the real life mysteries and things like that, I don't know. I can say I don't know. Yeah, the time I moved the whole mouth, that was a stressful stream, but at the same time, one of those things I'll never forget. And hopefully everyone else won't forget it either. Allow me to take on the suffering for you. You can move a mouth in watercolor. You really can. It's kind of like in competition. If you're in a pool competition and you miss a certain shot, and that shot's worth a lot of money, you're never going to forget it. And that kind of way, pressure is a really good teacher. It assists you in memorizing stuff, like taking an exam or something, a calculus exam, and you forget, I don't know, something like the quadratic formula, like in order to simplify a certain function to break it down into components. Something little like that, like you'll remember it. You'll remember that instance. So yeah, I'll always remember that time where I didn't know if I could use the water to move the dark of the mouth up. I won't forget it. Yeah, still have a kind of like a wow factor. But you know, this paper is actually starting to flatten out. As you can see, that glare is gone. So it's starting to do its thing, I guess. I don't know, I guess as the water dries, maybe the fact that I taped it all around. In the past, I used to tape only the top and the bottom, but I have the whole thing taped. So that might play a role. I don't know. I've experimented with a couple different setups with this. And this happens to be the most reliable. Oh yeah, of course, the more you think you know, the more you realize you don't know stuff, yeah. Kind of like being a motorcyclist and not realizing that making a left turn in an intersection presents a certain blind spot that you don't see with your peripheral vision, and that's where a lot of accidents happen, or near accidents. So right when you see something come out of nowhere at you, when you're making a left turn, and then you realize that somehow you're still okay, you kind of don't forget that. Even when you drive a car, like, you'll always know that there's a certain blind spot when you make a left-hand turn into traffic, at least in the US. Certain pressure situations kind of like instill things in your mind where you just don't forget them anymore. That's actually one reason it's important to paint from life. Once the model timer runs out and you have the jaw completely on the wrong side or something like that, that's a certain pressure scenario that doesn't exist when you're painting from a picture by yourself. Or you could video it or live stream it, and then pressure is definitely on there. But it teaches you things. The pressure teaches you things by helping you remember. Okay, so we're getting close to the next break. Then when we return, we'll have a little subtle trivia for the next half hour or so. I don't think this one is gonna take the whole 3 hours. I think we've gotten a little bit faster over time with these. So not really that much of a need to go that long. Thanks, Giselle. And then tomorrow will be the usual oil paint a la prima kind of thing with color. And then Thursday we will do a landscape. I haven't decided what landscape yet, but we'll do a landscape with acrylic. I'm thinking of something bigger than usual. Probably like a 16-20 inch. No worries. Thanks for joining, Mark. Mark L. Have a good night. So in the darks, you can add some subtleties without raising the value too much. Kind of like using, using lead white and oil paint, but you gotta be a little cautious with the value. I could easily overdo that and make it too light or too dark, but it's gotta stay in that value range. And now at this point that glare is completely gone, which is a good thing. That's what we wanted, that glare to go. So it looks like there's a sighting somewhere in New York. Oh, okay. That's something. Although we did have some sightings in Maryland. Not that I'm in Maryland anymore, but it was in the news. Some drones droning around. Doing drone things. So using the cold pressed arches is definitely a big upgrade to the what I had before, and not so much because it doesn't warp or whatever. That's why I got it, so it wouldn't warp as much. But mainly because it's a rougher paper. So initially I can use a thicker brush to add planes and whatnot, cover the entire surface, like we did with that bigger brush. And even now, getting into the subtleties, it's so much. It has more of tooth to it, I guess, but it's still not overly textured to the point where I can't work with it. So that's a great thing. Yeah, Giselle Hugo's birthday party was great. We took him to go meet Santa. I initially wanted to invite people over like last year, but we decided it would be just us taking him to go meet Santa. I'll share the picture closer to the end of the stream. It's because I know that most people aren't really here to see pictures of my Shiba Inu. Well, thanks for asking. We took him to Starbucks to get a pup cup. Now remember how I said that this could be moved up or down? We can move it up a little bit. So pretty much just as free as you would be with oil paint. Now obviously what you can't do with this that you can do with oil paint is the texture. The Rembrandt kind of thick palette knife looking texture. Now that we cannot do. Watercolor by nature is very fluid, so not a very thick pasty kind of thing like with oil paint. But from a distance it could look that way. It could. Oh yeah, he liked Santa. He didn't freak out. Apparently the guy that was playing Santa was said that other Shivas were not as friendly with him. He was friendly. Oh, fire water too much. '17th century fire. We can lighten it up a little bit. See, so easygoing, this material. Alrighty, so it is about that time. We're gonna take another break for about, again, like 5 minutes or so. It's kind of interesting when I take a break. We have like 10 more people watching the video, maybe because I'm not talking, or I don't know, who knows. But anyway, we're gonna take a break for a couple minutes. I'm gonna play a short little video sample from my Patreon. We will return to the subtleties, which again, not that much left on this. And we'll do just a little bit of subtlety trivia, maybe no more than 15 questions or so. We will see. Oh, of course, yes, birthday cake was pretty much a big pile of treats. I didn't want to get him sick with anything. But yeah, big pile of treats. But I'll have the Santa picture for you at the end of the stream. So we're going to take a short little break and return in just a couple minutes. Alrighty, we have returned here to continue this one, and some of you may have noticed that the light changed a little bit. So we had some daylight in the beginning of the stream, and it slowly started to drift away into nighttime. So that's why I just changed the light sensitivity a little bit for you. Not really much left on this painting except for just some really minute subtleties. So we'll go ahead and introduce the subtle trivia for those of you that are there still watching. So again, not too long, only about, I don't know, 15 or so questions till the stream will end. So the first is going to be talking about something I mentioned in the beginning, and it's also part of the title of the video. What paper am I currently using for this watercolor? For 1 point. Whoever can type the fastest will get this one. Ooh, okay, ARCHES. I'll take ARCHES. That is true. There's ARCHES cold press, but ARCHES is close enough. I really don't know the difference between the hot press and the cold press just yet, till I experiment with them. It is said that I think from what I read that the cold press is better for detailed work, but I don't know. I gotta experiment with them. But yes, ARCHES paper, but it's the cold press. But you still get the points. You get that point. First point goes to Grace. Next question for 1 point. And this is gonna be another repeat question. What was the name of the art critic that Manet got into a duel with? Manet, the Impressionist, got into a duel with an art critic over a not so nice critique of one of his paintings. What was the name of the art critic? And these questions will come from I think it was BBC show or whatever, or a movie called The Impressionists. You can also watch Simon Schama's Power of Art. That's another resource for where I'll get these questions from. It's a different time, everyone. All the knowledge is just here for you on the internet. And it's now up to you to take the knowledge and do something with it. whether it's create your own videos like this or create your own original paintings, is all up to you. Durante is correct, at least from what I remember. Correct to Giselle. Next question, worth 1 point. What is the name of Claude Monet's first wife? At least I believe he marries a second time. But what is the name of his wife in the beginning of the show? Alright, that point goes to Grace. The name was Camille. Okay, next up for 1 point. So we've got Grace has 1 point, Giselle has another point. Grace got that one with Camille. I didn't mean the whole first and last name. How about this? For keyboard. Whoever is fastest typing on the keyboard on their phones. Type out the entire name, first, middle, and last of Caravaggio for 1 point. Who is going to type this one the fastest? The full name with a hyphen and everything. Full name of Caravaggio. Whoever is the fastest at typing or copying and pasting. Whichever comes first. I thought it was Marisi. Okay, very close, Grace, but I think I guess I'll get that one. I don't see the hyphen, but at least it's the full name. Michelangelo Marisi de Caravaggio. It was a typo. It was a typo. But again, that one was more of a typing contest. So very close, very close. So that one goes to Giselle. So I think you're tied. You're tied. Okay. Next up for 1 point. For 1 point. Oh yeah, it was an autocorrect. I know, that's autocorrect got you there. Autocorrect got you there. Next up for 1 point. In what museum is John Singer Sargent's El Jaleo currently residing at? For 1 point. All you need to say is the first name of the place. What painting, I mean, what museum is Sergeant El Jaleo currently residing at as of the time of this stream? No worries, Caselli setting up a tree. We got an electric one here. It's electric. But yeah, to be honest, this will probably not go more than 2 hours, 30 minutes. So I've got about 10 minutes maybe. So not too much more to do. Yep, the Gardner, Elizabeth Gardner Museum. The point goes to Grace. Almost. You are setting up the tree. And to anyone else that's interested in these streams, what we do in the subtlety stage of what we were doing in the past was a sort of trivia. I called it subtlety trivia just because I don't talk that much during this stage of the painting. Now some people prefer me not talk that much during this stage, but most people preferred some kind of active engagement. So to anyone that may be wondering what it is we're doing, that's what we're doing. Having some conversation here as we add the subtleties, or else it's just kind of me painting and not really saying anything. Now in the past it was difficult for me to do multitask, to paint and talk at the same time, and some painters will still refuse to do that, but I just kind of learned how to do that years ago and just continued to do that. Alright, no worries. Alright, let's introduce another subtlety trivia. This one will be for 1 point. Whoever answers this one correctly. There was another artist with the name Rembrandt. What was this artist's full name? Not Rembrandt van Rijn, but another Rembrandt. Can you imagine that kind of pressure from a child? Your name is Rembrandt. This is about what, like 200 years or so after? No, 17, 18, 19. About 100 years after Rembrandt, I think. No, yeah, I think only 100 years later. What's the name of the other artist with the name Rembrandt? Who lived about 100 years or so after Rembrandt van Rijn. Was very popular in the National Portrait Gallery in DC. Oh, thanks, Giselle. Thanks, Giselle. I didn't know of a Rembrandt garments. But if that is an artist that was named Rembrandt after Rembrandt's time, then that's actually quite valid. So if that is correct, you can take that point. I will allow another point though for anyone that can guess the name of the other Rembrandt that's famous for painting George Washington in the National Portrait Gallery. That painting, at least I think, is still there. Thank you for that comment. Ever since these streams started, I've become a little bit more efficient, I guess, with what to do in each block of time, like between each break, to the point where I think I only need 2. I mean, obviously there were always 2, but the third hour doesn't necessarily have to be that long anymore. It doesn't have to be the full hour. Obviously an hour is an hour is an hour, but you know what I mean. Okay, I don't know these other Rembrandts. It's kind of sad that I don't know these other Rembrandts. But the artist that I was talking about is Rembrandt Peale. So if both of you got that one correct, if there were a Rembrandt Harmissoon and a Rembrandt Garments, then that is definitely a viable answer. However, I don't know. So because I don't know, I will grant you those points, 1 apiece. Next up will be for 1 point. Whoever answers this one the fastest. This one will be: what is the name of the most expensive painting ever sold in the world? What is the full name of the most expensive painting ever sold in the world? And we know that painting is from Da Vinci, but what is the full name of that painting? And I know I tend to repeat questions, but at least anyone watching these streams for a while will get to know. So yeah, Rembrandt Peale. So if all those Rembrandts were correct, then yeah, you can share that point. But there is a new question in the air for 1 point. Okay, Giselle gets that one. Salvatore Bundi. That sold for a lot of money. A lot of money. Savior of the world. You know, I'm pretty slow at typing. I still when I type on my phone, I'll type with with my thumb. That's how slow I type. So you're not alone there. I am not very fast at typing. So next up for 1 point. What is the name of the artist that is best known for being a surrealist that had a very famous mustache? What is the name of the artist that was most famous for his surrealist style that had a very funky mustache? For 1 point. Okay, Grace gets that one. Dali. Salvador Dali is the correct answer. Next question. What is the name of the artist that was for a certain period of time in a relationship with Frida Kahlo? What is the name of the artist that was in a brief period of time in a relationship with Frida Kahlo? Oh. All right, Diego Rivera. That one goes to Grace. Now I think Grace is in the lead with only a couple minutes remaining on the stream. Like I said, probably 2.5 hours is what we need for these. We've gotten a little bit faster. Now obviously there's some things here where I can start to make them more smooth, but notice how I paid more attention to this. Let this be a little bit more crude. So certain things I feel don't need to be taken to that nth degree anymore, just because it's not really that necessary, I think, in my opinion. Like I can use just the paint or the water itself to smoothen that out. It's not a major concern. So, right, there are so many surrealists with probably funky mustache. I think in the most books, I think Dali would be the answer to anything you type surrealism. I think, I don't know, but that could vary. But I think this one will go to Grace. I think, yeah. We're about 2 hours 30 minutes. Before we go, though. Oh, but when I say brief period of time, I mean like, it could have been their entire life. I didn't specify exactly how many years. It could have been their whole lives. You're right. I don't know. I don't know. But okay, for the 10 people remaining here, anyone that may be interested in Hugo's birthday, we took him to the PetSmart to bring your pets to meet Santa. So going back to the break time, I think you can still hear me. So that's Hugo, and that's me with my eyes half open. But anyway, that's us with Santa Claus. You can see there Hugo, very happy little dog there. So that was his birthday. Hugo and Santa. Now Hugo, my Shiba Inu, is about, or exactly, 2 years and 1 day, 2 years and a day old. So that is Hugo. Thanks for all the birthday wishes for Hugo. Oh yeah, he was happy, for sure. He was happy. So that should be about it for this watercolor. Like I said, the rest would be just this subtle rounding things out here, but most of the work in terms of the rounding things out, I wanted to be here. So last thing to do is to sign it. On the back, of course, I'll write after Rembrandt, but it's kind of obvious. You'll know this is not intended to be the original Rembrandt. But these will be for sale at some point on my Etsy. So I'll sign it up here. And of course on the back it'll say after Rembrandt. Thanks, Grace. Thanks everyone for attending. We had a few more people than we did on Friday, so hopefully people will start to catch on that these streams have returned to their usual schedule, usual setup, and hopefully with upgraded internet. So that being said, remember the schedule is Tuesday through Friday, watercolor Tuesdays, oil painting Wednesdays, acrylic Thursdays, and pastel Fridays. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the very best, and I'll see you tomorrow.